Oh, this is different. I'm recording a tutorial for CMAC, so that's why the setup looks a little different. I'm kind of pointed in the corner rather than straight on to my background. But CMAC is partnering with the Fresno County Public Library, making a tutorial about making podcasts. And then when I'm done with this, I gotta clean my office. It's a mess. I kind of like try to position myself in a way where I don't show off too much of the mess, but it's a mess. I gotta clean this place up. Okay, we're much cleaner, but still not perfect. This room could probably be a lot cleaner. But we're also facing another angle because I want to jump into a Final Cut project here. I've been wanting to dive into this. Gilbert and I filmed the footage a while ago, but I just haven't had the time to analyze it. But I want to take a look at the colors from the Sony Alpha 1 and the A7S III, and we also recorded the A7R4. Now I did tests like this, filming the charts for the color to check color correction and color accuracy when I got the C70, and I still have the A7S III with me, so I thought this might be a fun way to wrap up this week before I take this back. Really dive in and take a look at a couple of different picture profiles and see how far off from quote-unquote perfect these picture profiles for these cameras are. So I've created a Final Cut library, I imported my footage, I'm going to make a new timeline here. We'll just call this Sony Color Charts. We'll keep it at 4K ProRes Lite. Now for the Alpha 1, we filmed some footage at 4K, some at 8K. I don't think there's going to be much of a difference from the color between 4K and 8K. I was just also curious about the sharpness, so we did film the sharpness chart. Take a look at that. We can pixel peep that. But as long as lines are straight and there's no alias and moire, which is actually my biggest problem with the A7R4, we should be in a really good place with these cameras, and seeing how the hue versus hue curves kind of shape out is going to be, how easily will I be able to match the A7S III, the Alpha 1 to each other, but also to the Canon cameras we have. Also, we recorded all of this in H.265 and I don't have an M1 Mac. I guess I could borrow Lauren's M1 MacBook Air, but it's fine. I'm not really going to play the footage. I'm going to basically drop it in the timeline and freeze frame it, so it shouldn't be too taxing on my computer. So I'm going to skip the sharpness for now. I'm mostly interested in the color, and I'm basically going to get all of this going. So I'm probably going to cut and I'll just lay everything out and show you what's what. And we're back. Okay, so I've got my timeline all laid out. We're gonna break this down like the last time and just kind of take a look and see what the color chart tells us. So we're gonna start with the Sony Alpha 1 in 4K S Cinetone. It's at its base ISO, so it should be nice and clean. For the A7S III, that technically kind of has a dual ISO. We didn't do the higher one, we just did the lower one. Same thing with the Alpha 1. I do believe it's technically a dual ISO, dual base ISO. I can't remember now. I think it is, maybe not. Anyway, the base ISO for S Cinetone is ISO 125. I'm gonna do like last time, go in and make a mask around the chart here, and we're just gonna isolate the chart, and I'm gonna turn off my media and take a look at my scopes. All right, everything looks pretty good. The Skin tones aren't too far off of the skin tone line. All of these colors are essentially pointing in the right direction. Cyan, maybe if we were to crank up the saturation, cyan might miss a little bit. Red might miss a little bit. The skin tones do get further off, but it's not bad. So let's kind of clean this up. Let's add some hue curves here and grab some of these colors. Hue versus hue, yellow. And let's just have the colors here. Final Cut likes to make all these extra dots, but I want to move them individually here. Cyan, green. All right. So our red is just a touch off. And pulling that red does also pull our skin tones pretty close in line here. Our yellow, that did pull the yellow just a tiny bit. I'm gonna pull the yellow back. The green just a touch. Here's our cyan. That was a little problematic, but now we're back on course. Our blues kind of spot on. Our magenta, just a touch off. Now, the levels of the saturation on these clips, we're looking okay. Red is definitely stronger than the rest. Green's a little hot. So if we go in and make our hue versus saturation curve, let me clean up these dots here. So our hues are on, but they're not balanced. They're a little hot one way or another. So we need to bring down our red and our green, which we may need to do a little pushing and pulling. But otherwise, yeah, we're looking pretty good. So the red's kind of hot. So I'm gonna bring red down a touch to kind of, rather than bring everything up to meet it, I'm gonna bring red down. I'm also gonna bring green down a little bit. And again, this is a problem with Final Cut. It doesn't have the extra ring in the middle of the vector scope, kind of letting me know where 50% is. I'm hoping the next Final Cut update has that. And I'm just too lazy to install DaVinci Resolve and learn how to make a SQL server. Yeah, this is looking pretty good. So if I go back to my color wheels and turn back my saturation, it's a little desaturated for my taste. So I would probably boost the saturation just a little bit, just a touch. We're looking pretty good on our brightness, and I tried to nail exposure as much as possible. So S-Cinetone, let's look back at our curves again. It's not much. The only thing is red, which is our skin tones, really pushing it. And I think that's kind of what S-Cinetone is trying to do. But I'm not mad about it. It's pretty close. And I can save this in Final Cut. I can save these curves as my S-Cinetone fix if I needed to match it to the C70 or something. But then I would also need the C70's fix. But then we would be pretty matched up under these lighting conditions between these cameras. So not bad. This curve, we've made a little changes to the cyan and the red, and then I had to kind of push and pull the yellow and the magenta to just kind of balance those out. And red was hot, green was kind of hot, but those are colors. How much these hues are saturated is kind of the choice of the color. That's Canon's colors always have super saturated reds to make skin tones pop. So that's just a choice. It's not too crazy. Now, let's jump over to the 8K clip. should be seeing, you know, practically the same thing. So if we go in and hit this mask here, we should essentially be seeing, yeah, the same thing. The green and the red are a little bit hot. The skin tone's a little, just a touch off. Let's just bring up the saturation, just confirm. Yeah, it's basically the same picture profile. We're just at another resolution. And I don't know why, if the 8K, the image looks smaller. I can't remember if I moved the camera or if that is a crop factor when we go from 8K to 4K. I don't think so. But maybe I did. Maybe I did turn on 4K with the crop to try to get the sharpness as sharp as we can. I forget. We recorded this a little while ago. Now, if I copy my hue curves and paste them, so I only want to paste my hue saturation curves onto this clip, we should be looking the same. Oh, I did bring my saturation up. Let me turn my saturation off. No, not this one. Saturation, which was my color wheels. Yeah. We're looking pretty much the same. The lines here aren't as thick because it's a smaller space in the frame, but yeah, we are looking almost exactly the same. So no change switching between 8K and 4K. We don't get a color shift, which I really wasn't anticipating. And we'll look at sharpness in a little bit, but yeah, that's to be expected. That's what I was hoping for. Now let's take a look at the slog3, and then it's sgamut.cine. I just didn't put it in my description. So we've got this here. Let's apply our mask again. And what are we seeing? Yeah, we're just seeing super desaturated, low contrast. So let's just go into color wheels here, and let's bring our white point up. Let's bring our shadow point down. Let's just kind of make it match. Oh, I overshot it from the S-cine tone. This is very punchy. We'll bring this down just a little bit. Bring this up just a touch. Yeah, this is still a little more contrasty than where I left my S-cine tone, but yeah, that's fine. All right, let's take a look at what we're seeing for our color here. I'm seeing the skin tones are a bit further off. Red's still pretty strong. Cyan is not very strong at all. And green is curving offward a little bit. If I bring the saturation up, yeah, green is gonna miss the box. Essentially, we want, if I didn't mention this earlier, we want these dots to hit their boxes or be on the trajectory to hit their boxes. We want the skin tones to be on this line, but it ain't there. It ain't there. So let's do some hue versus hue and hue versus saturation to kind of balance these out. Also, I can see the yellow is probably the strongest color here. That's very interesting. I haven't worked with S-Log in a very long time. I personally had an A7S3 S2, A7S2. You know, I bought it day one when it launched. I really wanted, I had an A7S original, and before that I had a 5D Mark III. I never got rid of my 5D. The Sony cameras were kind of a stopgap for me until Canon could get affordable 4K cameras together. So this was my experience with the Sony cameras is a little limited, and I honestly did not know as much about color as I did then as I do now. I wish I did. Get that green pointed at its box. Whoops. There we go. Blue's a little off. Let's get blue pointed out there, and magenta, maybe just a touch, the tiniest touch. barely any change to magenta. Now our skin tones are still a little off, so let's actually grab the skin tones and bring those up as well. Although, you know, when we adjusted yellow, it did bring it closer in line, but now we're really there. All right. But yeah, our color saturation is a bit off, so let's get this going. We're definitely, I might, you know, earlier I was like, let's bring everything down to match, but I think for cyan, I'm just gonna have to bring it up because it's so desaturated compared to the other colors. So yeah, I'm gonna grab cyan and try to get it to match. Same thing with magenta. Magenta's a little under. Actually, I'm gonna bring cyan back just a touch because I'm gonna bring red down a touch. I'm gonna bring magenta down a touch. And I'm gonna bring yellow down a touch. We're looking more balanced. Maybe my magenta's still a little strong. Maybe my cyan's just a little strong. So yeah, now we're pretty balanced. Let's compare this to our acetone. Yeah, we're still very saturated. I do need to turn down my color wheels here. We do need to keep some of that saturation. I could probably bring my highlights down, but now we're looking pretty close to the acetone once it's been color corrected. So that is very promising. I guess I can bring my shadows down just a touch. Maybe I overshot it with the shadows. But that isn't bad. So that being said, this curve is quite a bit more dramatic than the last one. You know, the green really needed to be changed, and the saturation of cyan and magenta really needed some work. So this is a little less color accurate than the acetone. Not crazy, you know, it's workable. And I believe, you know, if we didn't have any of this on, I believe if we hadn't made any of these changes, the lookup table from Gerald Undone gets us pretty good. I'm gonna let me add a new set of color wheels here. Bring up the saturation a touch. But he's got it pretty dialed in. Blue is a little off, and the skin tones are a little off. I'm actually surprised by that. But I thought, you know, Gerald's free S-log3 S-gamut cine was going to be pretty spot on. Maybe a little extra purple because he loves purple. But yeah, I'm surprised the skin tones kind of lean yellow, and yellow is a little desaturated. I'm surprised by that. That's very interesting. You know what? I think we did a decent job getting it nice and balanced right here. I think I could live with this. I guess while we're here, the other thing we could see is what does the built-in Final Cut white balance tool think of S-log, so we could actually go and select balance color. And the automatic, this is not great, but if we go to the white balance option and select, you know, what should be white or gray, we're looking at that. Let's go back to this color wheel. Bring up our saturation a little bit. Let's bring up our highlights and bring down our shadows. What are we seeing now? Let me turn on my mask again. Yeah, not great because our skin tones are still going to be off. Our green is still almost just as off as it was before, and our cyan is still pretty desaturated. But you know, this isn't my least favorite look, but the auto white balance in Final Cut did okay. I feel like this is a lot akin to the new color correction that the Apple TV is doing. People are saying like it's not really pushing the envelope to be a ton more color accurate. It is bumping saturation a bit. but it's not really fixing the cyan problem, the green problem, how red and yellow are kind of oversaturated. It's not really doing that. So, yeah, it's it would be nice. It would be nice if there was a tool that we could just use the white balance dropper and it fixes it. And I know like Color Finale has its plugin for Final Cut, and you can basically put your grid, basically like I drew the mask around the color chart. It's supposed to read the color chart and fix your colors, but I've heard it's also pretty hit and miss. You know, I would love to automate, you know, what I'm doing with these hue saturation curves and get things going a lot quicker. But I really haven't seen something that does a better job automatically to nail your colors, your skin tones, right out of the box. You know, if I don't think I could make that tool. I would love for someone to make that tool. I don't have the savviness to put that tool together, but I would love to see it. But in the meantime, you know, if you need things to be color accurate, take your color chart, hop in your hue versus hue and your hue versus saturation curves and dial it in. Let's keep going. We've got S-Log overexposed. So it tends to be with Sony cameras in their compressed format. Before I used, you know, the A7S III and the Alpha 1 where they had 10-bit color 422 to kind of keep your noise down. You would err on overexposing one stop, maybe two stops. I'd say, you know, unless you're really like clipping stuff that you don't want to be clipping, overexposing two stops was a good idea, so that you could bring your whole image down and crush the noise in the dark parts of the image. Of course, you're going to lose dynamic range that way, but you could get a nicer looking image. Now, theoretically, we should be able to, this shouldn't change the color of things. So I should be able to paste my mask and my hue saturation curve, and my colors should still be accurate. I'm just everything is elevated higher. It's all brighter, but everything seems to be pointed in the right direction still. So all I would need to do is just bring my overall exposure down. So if I bring my exposure down, my highlights are back down. I could probably bring my highlights down a little further. My shadows up just a touch, just desaturate it or decontrast it just a touch. And we're looking pretty close to this other version. You know, bringing the exposure down does increase the saturation just a touch as well. But we are looking, and you know what, to get them a little bit closer, I might just bring the midtones. Whoops, not that one. To get them a little bit closer, I might just bring the midtones down here just a little bit. And now we're exceptionally close. So I would say, you know, like the other Sony cameras, if, you know, we're at the base ISO for S-Log 3. But if there is noise that you're trying to get rid of on these Sony cameras, yeah, if you bring it up a whole stop, you're probably going to be pretty safe. Now let me copy this. This next clip is 2 stops overexposed. So again, we're a little brighter, and I copied my compensation. I've compensated my 1 stop overexposed. So essentially we're just 1 stop overexposed again. So if I hop into my color wheels and bring this down again, I bring this down just a little bit more, and I'll bring my highlights up just a little bit. Now, because I did that, I need to bring my mid-tone down just a touch more. But now we are looking very, very close between all 3 of these. You know, I could get it closer if I needed to, but yeah, we're still looking good, and my white chip is not overexposed, even, you know, 2 stops over. I think that's usable, unless, like, you know, the top of someone's head is being overexposed. When you are overexposing 2 stops, 2 stops is doable on the Sony Alpha 1. Now also just for fun, I underexposed the A1, the Alpha 1. Let's copy our original exposure, our not overexposed, not underexposed image, and bring that in. We're looking good, but it is definitely darker. And if I were to simply bring my exposure up, we're going to find that we're less contrasty, and there's definitely noise in these darker chips. So let me bring my shadows further down. Let me bring my highlights up. I guess I should bring my shadows up a little bit. Yeah. But also, like I was bringing my midtones down, I kind of need to bring my midtones up. I need to kind of push and pull with the shadows to get it closer. But let's look at this full screen here. There is definitely a lot more noise in these chips here in comparison to the overexposed image. Now, this is still really fine noise. The noise is more pronounced as I'm scrubbing through and playing back because I don't have it on best quality because, again, this is H.265 footage. You might be able to hear my fans are spinning up on my late 2018 15-inch MacBook. It is working hard. One stop, two stops, just a tiny bit cleaner, and one stop under. So try, I think it still stands to reason. Try not to underexpose this footage or you will get noise in your shadows. I'm sure denoising will work out okay. It would work fine to clean that up. But yeah, if you're on a quick turnaround, best to not overexpose. But every exposure we step up, this cleans up a little bit more and gets real dirty when we underexpose. Yep. Okay, moving over to the A7S III. We're going to do the same thing again. We used the same lens. It was the Sony G Master 135. We stopped down just a little bit, and you'll see that in the sharpness test. We'll take a look at that at the end. But let's look at color first. I'm going to draw my mask around the A7S III chart. And let's turn up our saturation a bit so we can just see where we're at. And again, like the Alpha 1, our S-Cine tones looking very similar if we go back to the Alpha 1. And if we turn off our hue versus saturation and we turn up our overall saturation, yeah, the skin tones lean a little yellow, cyan and magenta is a little lacking. Let's compare that to the A7S III. Cyan and magenta could use a little bit more, and the skin tones are a little yellow. So if you're happy with how this looks, the A7S III and the Alpha 1 are gonna match up really, really nicely. If you're doing a live stream and you just plug the two cameras into an ATEM Mini and leave it in S-Cine tone, they're gonna match up great, no problem. But if you want them color corrected and color accurate, heck, I should be able to just copy these curves from the Alpha 1. I only need the Hue Saturation Curves at this point and turn them on. I guess I could bring up the magenta a little bit more on the saturation. We're a little close. Our blue is also just a tiny bit off. And of course, I didn't do this with the Alpha 1. I could grab my skin tone. Whoop, that's for saturation. For hue versus hue, we can grab our skin tone and get that more in line. And then I can bring my saturation back down on my color wheels, get it about halfway. We're looking pretty good. Maybe the cyan could use a little bump. We're looking pretty good, but the Alpha 1, A7S III are gonna match. They're not too far off. These are very minor adjustments on the hue versus hue. The saturation of the magenta and the cyan, the red and the green, they're kind of off, but I think that's more of like a stylistic choice, which colors are more muted and which ones are more vibrant. You know, I think they're really trying to make skin tones pop. So that makes sense if we're kind of really pushing the red, but then on kind of almost on the opposite end of the spectrum, we're also pushing green for landscape. And then kind of pulling back the magenta, because that can kind of make things look a little goofy, a little too purpley in our skin. We want to look red and full of life and full of blood, but we don't want to look like purple, like we've been holding our breath too long. So I can kind of see why those are a bit desaturated. So our curves looking pretty good. Now, is the S-Log3 S-Gamut Cine the same on the A7S3 as it was the Alpha 1? That'll be really interesting. Let's jump into that. I don't believe I moved the camera, so I should be able to copy my mask over. To my mask, yeah, my mask is basically the same. Let's bring in, well, first, let's just take a look at our saturation. Let's bring this up, and let's add some contrast to our image. And yeah, this is looking a lot like the S-Log out of the Alpha 1. So I think, again, I'm going to copy my curves from the Alpha 1 over. Just need these curves. And how are we looking? I think we're looking pretty good. So I would guess to say that the S-Log3 from the Alpha 1 matches very, very closely to the A7S3. I would maybe move my cyan a little bit and maybe the blue just a touch. I think I desaturated my reds a little too much for this, but I think we're doing really, really well. From, you know, the two versions of S-Log3 are very, very close, which is unlike some of the Canon stuff. So, you know, you get C-Log2 on one camera and on another camera, and like, yeah, they're the same amount of desaturatedness and the same amount of low contrast, but man, the colors can be way, way different. So this is promising. You know, if you needed to match an Alpha 1 and an A7S3, if you want to make one your A cam and the other your B cam, we're looking pretty close. So that's very nice. I feel comfortable being able to run with these two cameras, even though they're not the exact same camera. We'd be able to run with both of them and be confident that they're going to look pretty close right out of the gate. And you know, if we remember to film a chip chart, we'd be looking really, really close. Let's also see how clean our over and underexposed images are, so we can copy this and paste it onto the overexposed. We're going to bring everything in here, and we just need to hop over to our wheels here, and we can see, yeah, we're just about clipping with the white. The black is quite lifted, so we can move our overall exposure here just a little bit, and then I'll bring the shadows up just a touch. Maybe I'll come down just a little bit more, bring that up just a little bit more. How close are we now? Yeah, I think I can bring this master down just a touch more. And I kind of lifted the shadow so that black, no, I guess I lifted it too much. I can bring that black chip back down just a little bit, and I might bring the mid-tones down a little bit as well. Yeah, that's matching pretty good. So our one stop overexposed, pretty easy to match with perfect exposure. I just metered in the camera. Let's copy this and bring it over to our two stops overexposed. Let's get that looking about the same. Let's hop over to our color wheels, bring that down a bit, bring the shadows up a bit so our black chip is just on the line. Let's bring our midtones down just a little bit to match. So here's, good exposure, 1 stop overexposed, 2 stops overexposed. They're very, very similar. Let's look at this full screen and take a look at our noise. Base ISO, good exposure. It's pretty clean. There is a little bit of noise in these darker chips, but not unusable. We moved up a exposure value, and these are a little bit cleaner. And now we're 2 stops overexposed. There's hardly any noise here. There's a little bit of noise here. So that's looking pretty good. So I would say, again, as with most Sony cameras, if you can overexpose a little bit without clipping the stuff that matters to you, people's shiny spots on people's heads, their eyes, their face, your product, if you're filming product stuff, this will look good. Now, here's the dreaded look. What happens if we underexpose? How noisy is it? Let's bring this in. Yeah, we are underexposed, so let's bring it up. I think that's about where we were. Let's bring our shadows back down. But our midtones are a little low now, so let's bring our midtones up a little bit. I think we could maybe bring the highlights up just a touch. Maybe I can bring the shadows up just a little bit, just a touch more. I'm not getting the granular control I want. Negative 0.23. Yeah, let's go with that. Let's do negative 0.22. Oh, there really isn't a step between there. Let's go with that. Okay. So here's good exposure at base ISO. Tiny bit of noise. We can live with it. Less noise. Actually, I could bring my midtones down, and that would even crush that a little bit more. 2 steps overexposed. Is there a tiny color shift? Did we get a little more? Yeah, so this is the other thing with S-Log3 that I experienced with my A7S III. At different exposures, there tends to be like a tiny bit of a magenta shift, especially in S-Log3. So we lose a little magenta as we moved up in exposure. But then it came a little bit back. So I don't know what's up with S-Log3. And this is kind of the reason why personally I moved away from Sony and back to Canon. Actually, I never really left Canon. I always had one Canon camera in my arsenal. I feel like S-Log3 has a little bit of like in the shadows and lower part of the midtones, there's weird stuff happening with magenta with S-Log3, which is supposed to give you the most dynamic range. I don't know what the fix is for this. I definitely experienced it with my Sony a7S II. I was kind of hoping that this would be a fix. If you're filming dark, moody stuff and you're crushing all these lower tones anyway, probably not a big deal for you. But if you're doing big, bright stuff, and you're trying to capture as much dynamic range as you can, I don't know if S-Log3 is great for that. I don't know. It might still not be for me. Yeah, more purple, especially right here. Kind of greens up a bit. And then it gets a little, just a hair purple magenta again. So I don't know. But back to noise. We're talking about noise. We underexposed once, 1 stop. We brought it back up. Look at all this noise in here. Not great. So again, don't underexpose your Sony footage if you can help it. Neat Video, Red Giant denoiser will probably clean that up a bit. Of course, you're going to lose some sharpness as you do that. But yeah, we're even getting noise in these darker skin tones here. It's not ideal. So keep your footage nice and bright. Even if you know you want it to be dark and moody in the final product, keep it bright when you film it and bring it down in post, because that's pretty noisy. My complexion is probably like here. It's probably doable, but people with more melanin, if you underexpose these cameras, you're going to get this weird red and green noise, this chroma noise that's going to be a little harder to clean up. If it was just like Luma noise, it was just grainier, that would be one thing. But the fact that there's like definitely red and green pixel or dots in here, it's not great. All right, moving on. After this, we swapped to the A7R4. This is probably my least favorite Sony camera to film video on, simply because it is an even higher megapixel count than practically any camera. Is the A7R4 the highest megapixel full frame camera? I think it might be. But that being said, it only does 4K video. It doesn't do 8K like the Sony Alpha 1, and it's line skipping. And if you're filming tiny details, you're gonna see aliasing. Gilbert and I filmed an Apple Watch video with the A7R4. We could see the OLED pixels doing that crazy moire thing on the A7R4, so it wasn't great. That being said, if you're like, I need a third camera, I've got the A7S III, I've got the Alpha 1, and I've only got the A7R4 to film that third angle, it should be fine. Make it the close-up. Don't make it the wide angle. The wide angle is more likely to get those, capture those finer details and get that moire and that aliasing. Someone's face will probably look great. But it's also only an 8-bit codec, like the A7S II. Only with the A7S III and Alpha 1 do we have the 10-bit codec. I wish the A7C had a 10-bit codec. I don't think any of those cameras earlier than the A7S III are really viable video cameras now that they've shown their cards and shown that they can do 10-bit. Now, it would be another thing too if Sony allowed 10-bit color to be output over HDMI, but even that, you can get the 422 chroma subsampling over HDMI, but you can't get 10-bit color. So I don't know. I don't know if I would buy any of those cameras earlier than the A7S III and the Alpha 1 at this point, if I was looking at Sony cameras for video, along with the S-Log3 kind of shifting. So we did film an S-Log2 on the A7R4 because it is only an 8-bit camera. Sony recommends, even though they put S-Log3 in these cameras, they do say like, this is an 8-bit, this is a 10-bit codec. Like you're really only going to be able to retain that data when you use it in the 10-bit mode. So let's just see what we can squeeze out of this and just see how color accurate it is. And you know what? Bringing this up, saturation, highlights, and shadows for contrast, it's looking kind of similar to the S-Log3. Our cyan is desaturated and a little off. Our red is pretty strong. The yellow is very strong. And our skin tones are just a little off. Green is also off. So let's hop into our hue saturation curves. Let's accuratize this curve. Accuratize. That's not a word. All right, we've got our dots on all these curves here. Green is off. That's way off. Let's bring that down. Red, maybe just a tiny nudge up. Our cyan is also off and very desaturated. And fixing that brought our skin tones pretty much in line where skin tones should be. We can tweak that just a tiny bit. We're looking good. We have noise in the shadows, which is not very promising, but let's also kind of fix our saturation here. Let's see what's going on. Why is the cyan so desaturated? I don't know. I didn't make these sensors. And honestly, I'm doing this, and there's probably some Sony engineer, if they ever watch this, I'm sorry. I'm like critiquing your work. And you're probably like, man, we worked really hard. We thought these were the best colors. We thought this is what it should be. You know what? Now that I look at this, our white point is way off. If I reset this, yeah, that clears all my dots too. Our white point is off. So let me go into the color wheels here. Like I'm pretty sure I may have missed this. I may have not white balanced. We're just all off. So yeah, I'm going to grab this master and I'm going to put our white point close to that crosshair right in the center. All right. So that does change what my curves need to be. My blue is a little more off. My magenta is a little off. My skin tones are more off now. Again, I may have messed this up. I may not have properly white balanced this camera when getting into this, but if I did white balance this correctly, there is something weird going on for sure with this S-Log2 profile. And the A7R4, great photo for stills. If you're filming raw stills, this isn't going to matter. It's just in video, we're using compressed codecs, so we don't have that raw ability to just push our color exactly where we want to go and have something that's like, or be able to make something that's very technically perfect very easily, because especially with this 8-bit codec, there's only so far I can push this. And we're already seeing, like noise in the shadows here. Like you have to overexpose this and you basically have to film a chip chart for this A7R4 for the colors to look accurate. Now, this is accurate. This is objective color that I'm trying to find. This isn't my subjective color. Like, does this look pleasing to my eye? I just want to make sure, is it right? But you can take something that is objectively correct color-wise and push it, as long as the codec, like 10-bit and doesn't break. We can push this in any direction stylistically. We could do a finishing lookup table. I could use film convert to give it a film look, but that's easier to do, I think, if you have something that objectively looks correct right out of the gate. And so far, the A7R4 has been the least color correct out of the cameras that we've looked at. Now, I did do an overexposure and underexposure test, so I think I should be able to just copy and paste as I have done before, and I will just adjust for exposure. If I just bring everything down, bring my shadows up a little bit, and then I do it again for the 2 stops overexposed image. So theoretically, this should create cleaner shadows. I should have, if I bring all this all the way down, bring that back up just enough, these highlights down just a little bit more, these midtones down a little bit more. Yeah, it's all kind of push and pull, but here's our base ISO, and there's a lot of noise here. And then again, in the kind of darker skin tones, I could probably bring the midtones down a little bit more, but that'll clean up the noise a little bit more. But these darker tones still have noise in them, and then it really cleans up with 2 stops overexposed. So, and again, this is a little bit greener. I don't know what's up with Sony's log profiles, but like magenta, I don't know if it's like over time, magenta kind of wavers in and out. I guess that's what happens, because I feel like I had some footage from the short, really stupid part 2 that I did like 5 years ago. I just had footage that like magenta wavered in and out, especially in the shadows in S-Log 2 and 3. Because I did film, that was the very first thing I filmed with my A7S II. That was the first camera that had S-Log 3, and I went against people's better judgment to film an S-Log 3 for some scenes. And yeah, just like magenta wavers in and out. And it was like my first project that I had with the A7S II, and I like immediately wanted to sell it because I was like, what is going on? But I needed a 4K camera for a couple of projects, so I held on to it. I held on to that camera for a couple of years, but I was always like, be careful of the shadows. I filmed in S-Log as little as possible. I filmed, there was no S Cinetone. I filmed in the movie picture profile, because I found that really wasn't happening in those profiles. But yeah, I don't know. I'm surprised that the S-Log like magenta shadow problem is still happening with the A7S III. Is it, let's take a look at the Alpha 1 one more time. It looks to me like the Alpha 1 is less of an issue, but there is a little bit of green in the shadowy area here on our standard exposure. But, and then this gets a little more magenta, and that stays about the same. So I really don't know. but it's something that kind of freaks me out about Sony cameras. People really love the A7S III. They're saying like, this is the camera that like checks most of the boxes. But I feel like this is something that's been weird for a very long time. Do I even color correct this underexposed A7R footage? We know it's going to be really noisy. Let's do it. Let's just do it. We've come this far. We've already been recording for an hour. What's another? But you can see it on the waveform here. There's like a line of noise. I'm gonna try to crush that noise. But look, the black chip hits black and the noise is still right here. This ain't good. It's not looking good. And my midtones are still too low. I'm gonna bring my midtones up, but that's gonna make the noise worse. Oh, this is so noisy. But this is a really strong example of the shadows having a lot of magenta. And I don't know, this is only a 2-second clip. And it doesn't really waver, but we can really see the change in the magenta shift going from the +2 overexposure to the, one stop underexposed. And maybe it's the noise. Maybe the noise is just magenta, but I want to say it wavers in and out. That's something that I've experienced with my A7S II. I don't know. These are the ramblings of a man going crazy. I did the same test with S-Log3 in the A7R4. I'm not going to do, I did an over and under. I think we know what over and under is going to look like. I am curious though. Let's bring in our color wheels here. I'm mostly curious, does it look like S-Log3 from the A7S III? So if for whatever crazy reason you want to run S-Log3 just because you want it to match, does it match? And it looks like it. Yeah, red and yellow are the strongest colors. Our skin tones are a little to the left of the line. Our cyan is desaturated. Magenta is a little desaturated. So yes, if you had an A7R4 and filmed an S-Log3, which I don't recommend because it's an 8-bit codec, and needed it to match the A7S III or the Alpha 1, it looks like that's pretty darn close. I don't recommend filming that way though. Use your A7R4 for behind the scenes photos, capture in RAW. That'll be the best outcome for that camera. Okay, and then we underexpose it. Now, let's do some pixel peeping. We got the Alpha 1 at 4K. Let's switch to, I have a preset here for I call it the pixel peep. That's sharp. It is technically line skipped. I think it's line skipped. Maybe pixel bend, going from 8K to 4K. But it is pretty dang sharp all the way to the center. If we blow this up 400%, we'll see the inaccuracies of this chart. Like this chart is not printed perfectly. It gets weird in the middle, but it's hard even to see with the human eye. But that is very nice. Let's jump over to the 8K clip. The 8K clip is even cleaner and it's about the same size because it was backed up. But there's, it's a little, we see the jaggies at 400%. But this is, very, very sharp, very, very detailed footage. The lens is sharp. It's the, it's the GM 135. But if we move in, there's a ton of detail, even on like this Shure box that I set the chip chart on. Here's the A7S III. It is a little darker. We can brighten that up. Oh, I guess I should mention as well. The lens was a little more open on the A7 or the Alpha 1 because its base ISO was a little higher. No, that doesn't make sense. Why did I do that? I don't know. No, it's lower. Yes, base ISO is lower on this versus the A7S III. So I did stop the lens down a little bit because it has a little bit of a higher base ISO. I think that's why I did that. I don't know. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm crazy. And if we go in 400%, we look at the center of that. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a ton of detail. The Alpha 1 does resolve a little bit closer, especially in 8K. You know, maybe the 4K is still a tiny bit sharper. There's still a little bit, I keep saying sharper, I mean to say more detail. There's a little more detail in the Alpha 1, even in 4K mode, than the A7S III. But again, I'm blowing this up 400% and looking at something this tiny on the screen. So not that big of a deal, not the end of the world. But here's where we, oh, and I left this in S-Log. I'm a dummy. Here's where it's not going to look as sharp. I think just looking at 4K, aside from the slight tint shift, yeah, let's punch in 400% again. The center of this sharpness, it stops resolving wider, even from the A7S III. So it's not as detailed, and that's just because it's such a high resolution sensor, and we're line skipping our way down to 4K. You know, this is a 9.5K sensor effectively, and when you've got a line skip a little bit more than every other line to get down to 4K, yeah, it's not going to be as detailed. So that's the A7S III. Here's the A7R4. And these jaggies are they jag even further. That's the aliasing from the line skipping. Whereas we don't really see as jagged edges on the A7S III that is a 12 megapixel camera. And if we look at the Alpha 1 at 4K, these edges are a little bit jaggier, but because it's from an 8K sensor, we're resolving a little deeper. And the actual 8K has the least jagginess of them all, because there's simply that much detail in the 8K image. So that's been a look at comparing Sony cameras, how color accurate they are, how detailed the sensors are. I hope this information has been useful to you. It has been for me. It's actually a little disappointing that we still have kind of like a magenta shift in the noise, and I think it's still wavering in and out on S-Log 3, a problem that I had with my A7S II. I hope Sony can fix that in their S-Log profiles. It's not going to break your whole video. You know, if you had your heart set on an A7S III because Sony finally has a 10-bit camera, or you have an Alpha 1 and you got to get some video, but you're primarily a photo person, it's not going to break it. I still made some really great videos with the A7S II, even dealing with this S-Log magenta tint weirdness. Again, I'm not a professional colorist. I'm just someone who makes videos, and this is just the things that I found that work for me and things I want to know about a camera when I use it. But I'm not a professional. I'm sure someone in DaVinci Resolve can show me how to fix this problem. I just don't have enough money to pay them to do that. But this is what I've found, and I hope that I can impart this information upon you. But hopefully it's not an issue of like the blind leading the blind, and I'm just making this more confusing and hard and difficult for you, the viewer. I lived with it. It's fine. It's just, it bugged me deep down, and I went back to Canon. And that's not to say Canon doesn't have its own set of problems. I would still like to fix a lot of my EOS R problems with an R5, but I just feel like color isn't one of those problems as much for me. They still have their own quirkiness. You can go check out my A7 or my C70 and EOS R and C200 color correction. Like the C200 in the 8-bit modes, it's got a magenta shift, but it's consistent. It doesn't waver within the same clip. So it's easy to fix. I can just have my preset, I fix it, and I move on with my life. Whereas I might change something mid-clip if it's shifting magenta mid-clip, like the Sony S-Log footage does. It's very weird. I've learned to live with it. If you like the A7S3, I think you'll learn to live with it. If you like the Alpha 1, you'll learn to live with it. But at least it's a 10-bit codec now, so you have more latitude to push and pull it to the color that you want. That's it for me. This has been a long one. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.